Okay, so what voter ID laws are racist?
Apologies, Mr. Cruz, your state of Texas, perhaps?
Let's just talk about it as a practical matter. When I go to vote, they ask me for my ID. I pull out my ID, I show it to them, I vote. Is that racist? 35 states across the country disagree with that because 35 states have voter ID laws in effect. But not just 35 states. 81% of voters in America disagree with the radical views proposed by the Democrats and the Democratic witnesses. Not just 81% of Americans, 77% of black voters in America.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to America First. If you believe in the Constitution, in fair and honest elections, in truth over narrative, then this is the channel for you. We bring you the raw, unfiltered truth the mainstream media and radical left don't want you to hear. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to America First, and turn on your notifications. Now, let's get into what happened in that Senate hearing. Senator Ted Cruz just did what very few people in Washington have the guts to do anymore. He held the left accountable for their lies, their race-baiting rhetoric, and their coordinated effort to undermine the integrity of our elections under the false flag of voter suppression. In a recent hearing, Cruz went toe-to-toe with 5 witnesses brought in by the Democrats to testify about voter ID laws. What started as a simple line of questioning turned into a full-blown exposure of the left's radical agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start with a question for each of the 5 witnesses. In your judgment, are voter ID laws racist? Professor Tolson.
Thank you for that question. So it depends. One thing we have to stop doing is treating all voter ID laws as the same.
Okay, so your answer, I want to move quickly, so it depends is your answer?
Yes, that's my answer.
Okay, so what voter ID laws are racist?
Apologies, Mr. Cruz, your state of Texas, perhaps?
Okay, so you think the entire state of Texas is racist. What about requiring an ID to vote is racist?
So I think, sir, that's pretty reductive. I'm not saying the entire state of Texas is racist.
You just said my state of Texas, so you tell me, what about the Texas voter ID laws is racist?
So the fact that the voter ID law was put into place to diminish the political power of Latinos with racist intent and had been found to have
You're
racist
asserting
intent,
that. What's your evidence for that?
The federal district court that first resolved the constitutionality of Texas's voter ID law.
Okay, so your view is voter ID laws are racist. How about you, Mr. Yang?
I agree with Professor Tolson. Voter ID laws can be racist.
Okay, that's
other
2.
context.
Mr. Science?
There are some voter ID laws that are racially discriminatory in intent.
How about in practice? In intent, fine, you say there's some racist with a malevolent intent lurking in the back of their mind. But let's just talk about it as a practical matter. When I go to vote, they ask me for my ID. I pull out my ID, I show it to them, I vote. Is that racist?
If the law that requires you to do that was motivated by racially discriminatory intent
What about the
under
effect?
our
Set
Constitution.
aside intent. Set aside intent. I'm asking about the effect.
Yes, in effect, I
Okay,
think that
Ms.
there are
Reardon.
discriminatory effects from a number of voter ID laws.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Reardon.
I'm going to give the witness a chance to answer the question. Go ahead, Mr. Sine.
Yes, in effects, I think many voter ID laws are discriminatory. And in design, they are designed to have that effect.
Okay, Ms. Reardon.
No, sir.
Mr. Van Spakovsky.
No, particularly because every single state that has passed an ID law has put in a provision to provide a free ID to anyone who doesn't have one. The turnout numbers show it has no effect, and I would remind everyone that the current version of the Texas voter ID law for in-person voting, the Obama administration agreed in court, in a court filing, that they were satisfied with it and that it was not discriminatory.
You know, I have to say this range of question actually shows the wildly partisan nature of the Democrats' proposal. The record should reflect all 3 of the Democratic witnesses invited by the chairman maintained to this committee that voter ID laws can be, in many instances, in most instances, I think of the various ways they formulated, are racist. So let me tell you who disagrees with that. 35 states across the country disagree with that because 35 states have voter ID laws in effect. But not just 35 states. 81% of voters in America disagree with the radical views proposed by the Democrats and the Democratic witnesses. Not just 81% of Americans. 77% of black voters in America support voter ID laws. 78% of Hispanic voters in America support voter ID laws. MALDEF should think about that. 81% of low-income Americans support voter ID laws. And yet, what this bill is about is putting radicals in charge of saying if you require an ID to vote, that is racist and must be struck down. This is all about partisan power. Now, DOJ has also said, under the Biden administration, that it is not going to presume that a state acts lawfully if it simply returns to pre-COVID voting laws. Ms. Reardon, Mr. Van Spakovsky, what does that tell you if they say after a pandemic, if you go back to the laws that existed before, DOJ is not going to assume that that's okay? What does that tell you about the partisan nature of DOJ?
By issuing the guidance that they did, it says to me that what they would like to do is make permanent the emergency procedures that were instituted by many states through litigation by the DNC throughout the country prior to the 2020 election. And they would like those to be permanent. And so rather than understand that they are temporary, they are going to go after states that design to go back to their original election procedures.
Well, and I think they also think Democrats did well under those emergency procedures, and so keeping those emergency procedures in place will predictably benefit Democrats. You know, I would note, in addition to disagreeing with the vast majority of the American people, the Democratic witnesses and the Democrats here also disagree with the United States Supreme Court. When I was the Solicitor General of Texas, I represented a coalition of states defending Indiana's voter ID law. Before the U.S. Supreme Court, a group of plaintiffs challenged that. It went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, by a vote of 6-3, upheld Indiana's voter ID law. Not only did they do so, Justice John Paul Stevens, one of the lions of the left, wrote the majority opinion where he said voter ID laws protect the integrity of elections. And yet, sadly, too many Democrats today don't want to protect the integrity of elections. And I've got to say, there is a view, particularly from Northeastern Democrats, that they look down on the rest of the country as a bunch of bigots and overalls, their Southern cousins who are too oafish to be as enlightened as they are. And I have to say there's an incredible hypocrisy in that states like Georgia and Mississippi have a higher black voter registration rate than states like Connecticut, the chairman's home state. They have higher black voter turnout rates than states like Connecticut. They have a lower gap between black and white turnout than in states like Senator Blumenthal's Connecticut. And in fact, states like Georgia and Mississippi, African Americans vote at a higher rate than white voters, and in Texas, they're basically equal. One of the sad realities of today's Democratic Party is they define race as follows. If you're a Democrat, you qualify. So under the Democratic view, I'm not Hispanic. Senator Padilla is. If you're a Democrat, you're an Hispanic. My abuelo and abuela would be very surprised to discover I wasn't Hispanic. But that's how Democrat views it. That's how the radicals in the civil rights division view it. And I will point out as an example, this committee, one federal district judge in the state of Texas, Jason Pulliam, is an African-American judge nominated by President Trump, sat at this table, presented superbly. The Democrats had no criticism, and every single Democrat on this committee voted against him. Why? Because they perceived him as a black Republican. He didn't qualify as a black man. And I actually asked, as the Democrats were voting against Judge Pulliam, do you have one basis to vote against him? Anything you disagree with? None of them had any single answer at all. This hearing's about one thing. It's about power, and it's about ensuring Democrats stay in power. That's cynical, and it's at the expense of democracy and the right of voters to express their will through free and fair elections.
Cruz opened by asking a basic question to each of the panelists. Are voter ID laws racist? A yes or no question. You would think that would be easy to answer. But instead of clarity, we got dodges, deflections, and mental gymnastics. One professor said, it depends. Another said Texas's laws were implemented with racist intent. Yet none of them could point to a law that explicitly disenfranchises voters based on race. Their reasoning? because a federal court once said there was discriminatory intent behind Texas's law. But they never mentioned that Texas later amended that law, and even the Obama Justice Department agreed the revised version was lawful and not discriminatory. That fact didn't fit the narrative, so of course it was conveniently ignored. Cruz was having none of it. He pressed harder. He asked point blank, what about requiring an ID to vote is racist? After all, we use IDs for virtually everything else in this country. You need ID to buy a beer, rent a car, open a bank account, fly on an airplane, even pick up tickets to a ball game. But suddenly when it comes to casting a ballot, something far more important than any of those, asking for an ID, is racist? That argument collapses under its own weight. And more importantly, the American people know it. Ted Cruz brought the numbers. According to polling, 81% of Americans support voter ID laws. That includes 77% of black voters, 78% of Hispanic voters, and 81% of low-income voters. That blows apart the left's claim that voter ID is a tool of voter suppression. Americans of every background overwhelmingly support the basic principle that elections should be secure and that you should prove who you are when you vote. But this hearing wasn't just about voter ID. It was about power. Cruz laid out what's really going on. The left doesn't care about access. They care about rigging the system in their favor. The Biden Department of Justice, under Merrick Garland, has issued guidance stating that even if states go back to their pre-COVID election laws that have existed for decades without issue, the DOJ will not automatically assume those laws are lawful. Think about that. The government is now implying that anything not molded to the left's emergency COVID-era rules could be presumed illegal. Why? Because the Democrats benefited from chaos in 2020. Mail-in ballots, drop boxes, unverified signatures, you name it. It worked for them. So now they want to make that chaos permanent. And when states try to restore order, they get called racist. Cruz pointed out the hypocrisy. He reminded the panel that the Supreme Court, in 6-3 decision, upheld Indiana's voter ID law. That decision was authored by none other than Justice John Paul Stevens, a liberal icon. Stevens wrote that voter ID laws protect the integrity of elections. But today, the Democratic Party has abandoned any concern about integrity. For them, integrity is a barrier to manipulation. Cruz also highlighted the arrogance of coastal elites. There is a disturbing attitude among many Democrats, especially from the Northeast, that Southerners are backward, bigoted, and need to be corrected. But the facts don't support their narrative. States like Georgia and Mississippi actually have higher black voter registration and turnout rates than states like Connecticut, home of some of the very Democrats pushing these accusations. In Georgia and Mississippi, black voter turnout surpasses that of white voters. In Texas, it's virtually equal. These aren't signs of voter suppression. They're signs that the left's argument is built on sand. Then Cruz got personal. He talked about Judge Jason Pulliam, a black federal judge in Texas nominated by President Trump. He was highly qualified, well-spoken, and completely uncontroversial. And yet, every single Democrat on the Judiciary Committee voted against him. Why? Because he's a conservative. And in the eyes of the left, a conservative minority doesn't count. They see race as a political category. If you're black and vote Republican, they say you're not really black. If you're Hispanic and don't toe the party line, they erase your identity. That's the real racism. That's the real discrimination. So what's this all about? It's about power. The left wants to define the rules of our elections, control the process, and silence dissent. They'll use race, fear, and misinformation to do it. And they'll accuse anyone who stands in their way of bigotry. But we see through it. We know the truth. This hearing, led by Senator Cruz, exposed just how far the left is willing to go to maintain their grip on power. They will demonize common-sense laws, dismiss public opinion, and rewrite history. But we won't let them get away with it. If you stand for election integrity, for truth, and for the American people, make sure you share this video. Like it, comment below, and subscribe to America First. Because the battle for our republic is not won in silence. It's one when we raise our voices, call out lies, and stand firm for what's right. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.